that what we saw yesterday happened after the president's unnecessary, counterproductive, and, most importantly, unlawful order. Trump and Hegseth jumped from 0 to 60, bypassing law enforcement expertise and evaluation. They threw caution to the wind and sidelined strategy in an unnecessary and inflammatory escalation that only further spurred unrest. Let's be very clear, there was no risk of rebellion, no threat of foreign invasion, no inability for the federal government to enforce federal laws. We don't take lightly to the president abusing his authority and unlawfully mobilizing California National Guard troops. As a result, I, in partnership with Governor Gavin Newsom, are suing President Trump and asking the court to set aside the president's unlawful action federalizing.
We have an incompetent governor, so I talked about governors, but I didn't talk about he's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states, and if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order. You had a disaster happening.
Are you going to deploy Marines in California?
We'll see what happens. I mean, I think we have it very well under control. I think it would have been a very bad situation. It was heading in the wrong direction. It's now heading in the right direction. And we hope to have the support of Gavin, because Gavin's the big beneficiary as we straighten out his problems. I mean, his state is a mess.
What crime has Governor Newsom committed?
A crime has he committed? I think his primary crime is running for governor, because he's done such a bad job.
Oh, man. Here we go. That is President Donald Trump talking about why he chose to go against what he himself said that he would not do, which is deploy troops to an American state without a governor's permission and asking for it. And he just said, oh, well, you know, California has an incompetent government. There's lots of incompetent governors in America. There always have been. There always probably will be. You know, democracy is going to give you a few incompetent buffoons. And it's even worse when you don't have a democracy like what we have, the plutocracy and the oligarchy that we have in this country, where money basically buys you elections. So you're going to have incompetent governors. But there is a code of value that, you know, you don't go over the governor's head in order to, you know, send in the troops all willy-nilly without any permission. And Trump is doing that. Now, why is Trump doing that? Well, look, we talked about this I think it might have been last week when Trump brought in Palantir. Trump has been testing out how far he can push the surveillance state, how far he can push his neo-fascistic agenda without getting any pushback. Now, one of the stories that happened this week that sort of got buried in the news is that they were forced to bring back Kilmar Obrego Garcia, who was the immigrant that the government, I think he's from, I want to say he's from El Salvador, that the government deported and sent to the dungeon in El Salvador run by their psychotic president, Bukele. And the Supreme Court said you got to bring him back. And so now the Trump administration actually has been forced to bring him back, but they're going to charge him with a whole bunch of trumped up charges because they're embarrassed now. So this whole second term really for Trump is about him trying to push the boundaries as much as he can before the Supreme Court or, whoever says stop. And even after they say stop, he's going to keep pushing it until somebody forces him to stop. And so what we're seeing is the Trump administration desperately trying to expand the surveillance state. We talked about the surveillance state a lot here on this show over the years. Hell, when me and Jonathan were on Monday nights 6-7 years ago, we talked about the surveillance state that has popped up post 9/11 has been aided and abetted by every president we've seen since then. Obviously, we got the Patriot Act not long after 9/11, which trampled all over our civil liberties. It was based on a bill that Joe Biden wrote back in the 90s. He brags about this. I don't have to lie on him. He brags about it. Bush signed it and implemented it. Barack Obama expanded it and started suspending habeas corpus for a lot of American citizens. Actually used drones to kill Americans like Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, who wasn't a terrorist, who was playing basketball with his friends while he was killed by one of Obama's drone strikes in an extrajudicial killing. And so there was a lot of people who were concerned about civil liberties throughout the Bush administration who didn't care about it during the Obama administration. And then those people who did care about it during the Obama administration, then they don't care about it during the Trump administration because, again, the powers that be essentially use the surveillance state to keep us in check. And both parties are part of it. And they know that partisan hackery will keep us divided enough that we will be cheering on the civil liberties of one group of people being taken away, while the other group of people will have their civil liberties taken away when the other guys are in office. It really is unfortunate that, people are so blinded by partisan hackery. They're so blinded by, this is my president. My president wouldn't do this. Donald Trump would not do this. Barack Obama would not do this. Joe Biden would not do this. George W. Bush would not. They all do it. And Donald Trump being that, guy with no chill whatsoever. He has expanded this to levels that even, during the Bush administration, people would have, been shocked by post 9/11. And so there's been a backlash to it. The protests began on June 6th, a week ago, following ICE raids that were targeting workplaces such as an apparel manufacturer in the Los Angeles Fashion District, a clothing wholesaler, and a Home Depot in Westlake. These raids resulted in the arrest of 44 people for suspected immigration violations and one for obstruction. One of the people who was arrested actually was David Huerta, who was the California president of SEIU. My grandmother's SEIU. I've done events for the SEIU over the years. I've been to some of their events and was the cameraman and filmed a lot of some of their events. SEIU is a big deal for the service industry. He was arrested during a protest for blocking a vehicle and was charged with a felony conspiracy to impede an officer. His arrest, the injury he acquired during this arrest, and the subsequent release on a $50,000 bond has become a focal point for the protesters. Now, initially, the protests started on June 6th around the Los Angeles Federal Building and the Metropolitan Detention Center, where detained immigrants were held. Protests were largely described as peaceful, but started to escalate last weekend. By the 7th and 8th of June, confrontations spread to areas like Paramount and Compton, with some protesters throwing objects, setting Waymo autonomous vehicles on fire, and vandalizing buildings with graffiti. The law enforcement department responded with tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbang grenades. You know, this is what they're doing to American citizens, folks, and some illegal immigrants as well. Let's just be real. It's probably a melange of both. The LAPD reported over 600 rounds of less lethal munitions used to disperse crowds. We actually saw the police shoot a Australian reporter, just aim and shoot at her while she was reporting. Did y'all see that? Like, so the LAPD, they shot her with a rubber bullet. Let me say that. They didn't shoot her with a live round. It was a rubber bullet, but still. The LAPD are not messing around here. Since June 6th, over 400 people have been arrested. There's been charges including failure to disperse, vandalism, looting, assault on officers, and possession of unregistered destructive devices, e.g. firebombs. And on June 10th alone, the LAPD arrested 225 people, including 203 for failing to disperse and 17 for curfew violations. Man, on June 7th, Donald Trump ordered the deployment of 2,000 National Guard troops, followed by an additional 2,700 Marines on June the 9th, without the consent of California Governor Gavin Newsom. This move, this is the first time this has happened since 1965. It has been criticized by state and local officials as unnecessary and inflammatory. The troops are tasked with protecting federal agents and facilities, not making arrests, though their presence has heightened the tensions. Now, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass has imposed a partial curfew in downtown LA from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. starting June 6th to curb vandalism and looting. Obviously, they inflamed this situation on purpose. I mean, a lot of people don't know, as much as we talk about California, California is actually much safer than it was 30 years ago. Look it up. California's violent crime rate was much higher 30 years ago than it is today. So this perception of California as this violent cesspool is once again used by the government to push Orwellian and draconian measures against the public. That is true. Now, these protests/riots have been compared to the 1992 LA riots with Rodney King that caused widespread damage and loss of life. 60 people died during those riots. Nobody's died here. These protests are confined to a 5-block stretch of downtown Los Angeles that most people in LA don't even go to. But anti-ICE protests have spread to other cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, though these have generally been peaceful with a lot fewer clashes. The Trump administration has labeled these protests as insurrectionist. Wow. So he does know what insurrection is. With Trump suggesting the use of the Insurrection Act and describing protests as animals and a foreign enemy, but he can't understand how sacking the Capitol and literally threatening the lives of elected officials to stop an election from being certified is insurrectionist behavior. Interesting. Now, here's the thing about this situation. And I started with, in my opinion, the most important part of the story, which is the surveillance state. The surveillance state and just overwhelmingly our government's draconian, Orwellian sort of lockdown on civilians here in this country. Because that ultimately is the most important part of this whole scenario. But I want you to understand that it's not black and white, right? What's not black and white is that the way that it's presented is either you support mass immigration, illegal immigration, and oppose the measures taken by the Trump administration, or the only way to not be for illegal immigration and mass immigration is to support what Donald Trump is doing. And I'm telling you, you don't have to choose either. I don't support either in this situation. Okay? Yes, what Donald Trump is doing is wrong. It is draconian. It is Orwellian. Yes, I'm using those terms over and over again. Draconian in that the punishments do not fit the crime. Orwellian in that they are completely about taking away our civil liberties and are very reminiscent of 1984, written by George Orwell. Like I said, the expansion of the surveillance state, ICE, which I think a lot of people think ICE is has always been around. ICE has not always been around. ICE is only about 20 years old. Before ICE, we had the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. But after 9/11, when the Bush administration was putting together the post-9/11 terrorism complex that they were going to use to completely subvert civil liberties, they put ICE together as a part of Homeland Security. So I do not support ICE. Okay, let me put that on the record. I do not support ICE. I think we should get rid of ICE. I think we should go back to how we used to get rid of people who weren't supposed to be here. The INS. Okay? And so it's important to separate these two things. Separate how you feel about illegal immigration from how you feel about the surveillance state. That is important. Let me get this caller really quick. Hello, caller.
Hey, Scott, there's two things that I wanted to mention real quick.
What's up?
First of all, I was calling you on a major traffic accident right here in the 5,000 block of West Fifth Avenue. You got 4 cars involved. 1 car is into a building. You got 3 ambulances out here. The traffic going west has been shut off.
Where is it at now? Would you repeat that?
In the 5,000 block west of Fifth Avenue in the Brunswick area.
Okay. All right.
But, Scott, as far as the immigration.
Yes.
I'm for ICE. I'm 100%. I'm not upset with Donald Trump with what he's doing because this can has been kicked down the line so long that something's going to have to come to an end. And we can't go to any other country. You go to any other country, you are going to be deported back. But the main thing I'm tripping on is everybody talks about black and brown need to get together. Oh, can I read something to you real quick?
Go ahead, because I'm probably about to beat you. I was going to beat you to it, but go ahead.
Okay, it's in a journal called Southern States, and this came out. Oh, come on, I done messed up. Come on, bro. I just had it, and I hit the wrong button. I think I should be able to pull it back up. But this came out in 1965. It's called Black, Brown, and White in Texas. And what it starts off saying, it says, let the Negro fight his own battle.
Mm-hmm.
Cleared by Felix Trinity, I can't pronounce his last name, but he's a Mexican-American civil rights activist in Texas and the national president of the League of United Black Latinos American Citizens. Now, he said this back in 1957. He said the Negro problem is not our problem. We do not want to ally with them. We do not want to deal with them. Their problem is not our problem. We even have our Latino kids who say they don't want to go to school with black kids because they smell bad. Now, there was a gentleman, his name is Reverend Leon Everett. And it says Reverend B. Leon Everett, a lone black member of the Houston School Board and the leader of the local chapter of the NAACP, expressed concern over the possibility of black and browns uniting after the Mexican-American youth told him, we don't want to go to school with blacks because they're dirty and they stink. We will not join in, as this black man said, we will not join any oppressed group that declares us as beneath them. I read that to say when I hear black people and I see black people down there at these immigration things hollering black and brown need to unite. Right now, to this day, in Chicago and Hilton, Little Village, Humble Park, we cannot go and open up a business. My stepson was working in Chicago, close to Humble Park, so him and his girlfriend decided to move over there. I told him not to do it. It took less than 3 months. They had to break their lease because of the constant harassment by the Latino population in Humble Park. You're not going to see a Barnes Mabel soul food place in neither one of those areas. You're not going to see a black-owned business in neither one of those areas. But yet it seems like every time someone needs numbers, they want to call on the African-American community. It goes all the way back to when the white woman wanted to fight for equal rights. They told the black woman, hey, come on, y'all can jump on board with us. But the black women didn't understand the jobs they were fighting for, you wasn't going to get.
Yep.
So you have plenty of black women that jumped on board of that, denounced everything, basically told their husbands, we don't need you. The government became the daddy, and when it was all over with, it was the white woman who gained what they wanted. The black woman stayed in a lower position because the father was gone from the house. We as black people got to quit jumping on everybody's bandwagon. I'm not putting black and brown with immigration things. I do have Latino friends that are here legally, and I have no problem with that. We kick it all the time. But when it comes as African American, black, color, whatever you want to call yourself, going to these immigration marches and at these Palestinian marches and stuff like that, we gotta be clean.
I agree with you 100%. Thank you for your call. I'm going to get right into. I was going to get right into that, Richie. Again, like I was saying earlier, ICE is a product of the 9/11 surveillance state, so I don't agree with it. So I do not support ICE, not because I support illegal immigration, which I don't. And like I said, we're going to get really into that very soon, right now. I support deporting people the way we used to. I don't support the surveillance state that we are using to justify deporting people. The surveillance state post 9/11 that has taken civil liberties away from Americans, I don't agree with that. But you are absolutely right when it comes to the sort of legacy black Americans being used as the agony aunt for every other group of people, whether it's white women, the gays, transgenders, illegal immigrants, and everybody else. I talk about that a lot here on this show. And particularly something like immigration is something that for 200 years, black civil rights leaders have made it very clear about how they felt about mass immigration and illegal immigration. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this issue. It's not a cut and dry issue. The Orwellian tactics, the draconian tactics of the Trump administration are bad. But that don't make illegal immigration good. And that don't make mass immigration good. We can go back to Frederick Douglass here, W.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Booker T. Washington, Coretta Scott King, A. Philip Randolph, Ralph Abernathy. All of these people spoke out against the way that mass immigration or illegal immigration affects legacy black Americans. They saw the effects that it had on black workers in cities and in rural America. Jobs that were held by black people in this country were taken by Europeans, or at least were held by Europeans and Chinese immigrants. So many people, so many times did our civil rights leaders, going back, like I said, almost 200 years, talk about this very topic. In 1853, Frederick Douglass said every hour on the hour, a black man is elbowed out of a job by an immigrant. That was 1853. 1879, Frederick Douglass once again talked about the negative effect that Chinese immigration had on legacy black American workers. He said they would rather have laborers who will work for nothing, but as they cannot get the Negro on these terms, they want Chinamen. The loss of the Negro is to gain them the Chinese. And if this thing works well, abolition, in their opinion, will have proved itself to be another blessing in disguise. So Frederick Douglass was the first black leader to talk about the effects of Chinese immigration, European and Mexican, and from Latin American immigration. Booker T. Washington in 1895. In one of his most famous speeches, the Atlanta Compromise Address, talked about the issue of immigrant workers taking jobs from legacy black Americans. Frederick Douglass targeted the industrialists who are employing immigrant labor instead of American-born blacks. He said, to those of you who look to the incoming of those of foreign birth, cast your bucket where you see, and we shall stand by you with the devotion no foreigner can approach, ready to interlace our industrial, commercial, civil, and religious life with yours. In 1928, the business manager of the NAACP, George Schuyler, talked about Mexican immigration. He said, if the million Mexicans who have entered this country have not displaced Negro workers, then who have they displaced? Stating the obvious, the absolute obvious. Barbara Jordan, one of the integral civil rights era politicians, the congresswoman who chaired the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform in the 90s, actually took a very stiff immigration stance and said the credibility of immigration policy can be measured by a simple yardstick. People who should get in do get in. People who should not get in are kept out. And people who are judged deportable are required to leave. That was Barbara Jordan in the 90s. Okay? Peter Kirsnow, the member of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, in 2016, this was just less than a decade ago, in a Senate hearing, talked about that illegal immigration had a disproportionate negative effect on the wages and employment of levels of black males. And he said particularly black males. Okay? Incarceration rates go up in metropolitan areas that have a large amount of illegal immigrants for black men. Okay? W.E.B. Du Bois, in the book that he wrote with Booker T. Washington, because they were rivals, but this is one thing they agreed on. Okay? He said these workers, the immigrants, came to oppose slavery not so much from a moral as from the economic fear of being reduced by competition to the level of slaves. The second object of the immigration philosopher is to make sure that when the rights of the laborer come to be recognized in the South, that the laborer will be white, and just so far as possible, the black laborer will be forced down below the white laborer until he becomes thoroughly demoralized or extinct. He understood the effect that mass immigration was to push black people down the economic ladder. Because at this point, the immigrants were coming from Europe. Marcus Garvey, who himself was an immigrant. I'm not saying he wasn't, but he talked about the role that immigration had against the way that immigration was used against black people in this country. He said, if you think that the white man is going to share a part of what he has and give it to you, you make a big mistake. You have enjoyed a portion of what the white man has because the white man was unable to keep it away from you because he wanted more. In order to get that more, he had to get the help to get it. But the time will come when he will have all the help he wants. And that is why this sudden immigration has started to the United States of America at the rate of 15,000 a day. Aliens coming back to the United States at the rate of 15,000 a day. Do you know what this means? It means this, that in the next 3 or 4 years, 1/3 of the Negro population of the United States will be in similar condition or position as we were in 1913 before the war. We will be out of jobs. We will be starving. We will be living next door to starving and starvation. That's Marcus Garvey. Okay? In the 1980s, when African American teenage unemployment was close to 80% in this country, our corporations petitioned the INS for more visas for cheap labor on the grounds that there was an unskilled labor shortage. Not a skilled labor shortage, an unskilled labor shortage, even though the fact that 80% of young black teenagers were out of work. And so what did Ronald Reagan do? Ronald Reagan, not known as being the biggest fan of black America, and he was not, he put together an amnesty plan that placated the demands of corporate America for cheap labor, and he naturalized 20 million people. Everything Ronald Reagan did was completely to undermine legacy black Americans, and that was a big part of it. And so in reaction to this, Coretta Scott King, the wife of Martin Luther King and a great civil rights leader in her own right, joined with 8 CEOs of America's leading black organizations to oppose Republican Senator Orrin Hatch's bill to do away with sanctions against employers who persisted in hiring illegal immigrants as a means of discriminating and reducing the wages against African Americans. This is what she had to say. We are concerned, Senator Hatch, that your proposed remedy will cause another problem. The revival of discrimination against black and brown U.S. documented workers in favor of cheap labor. In favor of cheap labor. Never forget, Cesar Chavez, greatest Latino leader this country's ever had, what he had to say about illegal immigrant labor in this country. Don't forget what he had to say about it. I play this clip very often. I bring it out all the time because it's always very very poignant in this type of situation.
The Mexican government to bring the Bracero program again. It's a vicious attack on the local worker, and it's just one of those things that agribusiness thinks they can get away with it. And our job is to inform the whole country what's happening together with a boycott and solve it that way. And so the workers themselves, even though a lot of them are Mexican descendancy themselves, are very uptight and very, very worried and very mad about the illegals coming to break their strikes, and it takes away their jobs, their livelihood, and so forth.
Does that put you in an uncomfortable position to be against the illegal immigrants because they are from Mexico? In other words, part of your program has been an appeal to equal treatment of people of Mexican origin. Right?
Oh yeah, sure, but we're speaking of the legal ones. You know, we don't want Mexico to export its poverty to us, and then
see, this is what I'm saying. That's Cesar Chavez. he made a distinction between legal Hispanic workers and illegal Hispanic workers. He understood that there was a difference. Coretta Scott King understood that there was a difference. Ralph Abernathy understood that there was a difference. And so again, this is one of the things about Donald Trump. This is one of the reasons why Donald Trump is so dangerous. Because Donald Trump actually makes the positions that he claims to be for toxic. And so he's making the immigration issue toxic. That's what he's doing. He's making it so you will not be able to talk about the effect that illegal immigrants have on wages and life in this country without siding with ICE and the surveillance state. And you shouldn't have to do that. Let me get this caller before I have to go to a break. Hello, caller. What's up?
How you doing there, Mr. Scott?
It's all good.
All right, then. I'm listening at you, but a lot of black people don't understand. If they start grabbing these illegal immigrants and like they're doing, just grab up busloads of you and handcuff you, shave your head, and get you out of there, the black folks lay back and think we made it.
Who?
Hey, what's to say years from now they don't start back to doing that to us?
When have they ever not done it to us?
I'm saying
I'm just saying the idea that we have to support illegal immigration in order for it to not be us, it's going to be us regardless. And let me just say this. The irony is every immigrant group we've ever brought in this country, you know who joins all the police departments and are always the hardest on black people? The immigrants. The Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Mexicans, the Middle Easterners, every single one of them. They join with white supremacy against legacy black Americans. I'm not saying, like I said, I love my Hispanic peoples, love Juan and Eve, love all these people. You know, they're all U.S. citizens. But my point is that mass immigration has always been to the detriment of legacy black Americans. And we have 200 years of civil rights leaders talking about it. And so, like I said, we don't have to support the Orwellian, draconian surveillance state way that Trump is going about this. But we don't have to support illegal immigration either. But thank you for your call. I got another caller before I go to the break. Hello, caller. What's up?
Scott, I'm going to get my second call out the way because you said something that made a lot of sense. And this is what happened when they did remember when the detention center was being brought? They tried to put that detention center here in Gary.
Yeah.
And they started busting all those people from other areas that who never come to Gary. They were showing up at the council meeting saying, well, if they build that detention center and they can't fill it, they going to start checking all the black people in Gary. And the next thing you know, the whole city council's whole attitude changed. That's the scare tactic that they use. Anytime they try to press something, they always go to the black person and say, hey, if they doing it to us, they're going to do it to you. But like you said, Scott, what has happened in the United States or even in this world that has been done to black people that has not been done to us yet? And we get that scare tactic in us, and we lose out. Right now, if that detention center was out there across the street from that airport, the money it could be bringing in, the jobs it could be bringing in, and think about this, Scott. Right now, Lake County Jail gets paid extra for every immigrant that sits out there, and they still flying them out of the Gary airport. So that detention center could have already built Gary with taxes being brought in and everything, but we always get, well, they going to do it to y'all next. What have they not done?
Yep, exactly.
Right,
thank you for your call. Thank you for your call. Like I said, you don't have to go for the okie doke on either side. You don't have to support the surveillance state, which will be used against all of us in order to say illegal immigration does not benefit working class and poor people. All you got to do is go back to Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Cesar Chavez, Coretta Scott King, Ralph Abernathy, A. Philip Randolph. Look, you don't have to be racist. Again, this applied to European immigrants, African immigrants. A. Philip Randolph said it best. You know, until legacy black Americans basically are completely compensated, we don't need to be bringing anybody here. He said that in 1935. We're suffering from immigrant indigestion. That was A. Philip Randolph, one of the greatest labor leaders this country ever had, one of the greatest black leaders this country ever had. Okay? It's important to understand we do not owe people from other colonizer countries who speak colonizer languages like Spanish, which is a colonizer language. It's not indigenous to the United States. It's not indigenous to Latin America either. They're products of colonialism just as much as America is. They say, you know, California used to be Mexico. It was Mexico for 27 years. 27 years. It was a colony of New Spain. Spain is a colonizer country. Most of these people are the descendants of the colonizers. They speak the colonizer's language just like we speak a colonizer's language. We don't have to let these people come here and disturb American life, and especially not legacy black American life on some, well, you know, what? Look, they sold Mexico and they sold our Southwest for $15 million. It might have been under duress, but they were compensated for it. We are not obligated to let New Spain to let the Spaniards and the descendants of the Spaniards come here and disrupt our lives here in this country. I'm sorry, that is just not the case. You know, so many, you know, white liberals and the colored people who love them go along with this nonsense, perpetuate this nonsense. Black people buy into it. Do not buy into this nonsense. Go back to the civil rights leaders who actually got things accomplished and actually improved black life, and the labor leaders who got things accomplished. They all had a very strong opinion about illegal immigration, and they weren't for it. Virtually none of them was for it. Oh, before I go, let me just this one last point that annoys me when they talk about illegal immigration. They always come with the illegal immigrants pay taxes. That is one of the most annoying points. They say undocumented immigrants pay taxes. They paid $100 million in taxes, $100 billion with a B in 2023. And that is true. They did pay $100 billion in taxes in 2023. But do you know how much we spent in 2023 taking care of them within our system? $150 billion. $150 billion. That just came out in Congress a few months ago. So yes, they pay $100 billion. We spend $150 billion on them. So you can see that at News Nation. You know, I just read that article. Great article. So $150 billion per year we spend on illegal immigrants. You know, so please, we don't have to absorb these people. God bless them. God bless the legal people. But if you are not a legal person, we do not have to absorb you. That's just nonsense. All right, folks, we've been talking about some heavy stuff, and it is already deep into the next hour. Let's get into the happy happies. We'll be right back after these.